She wanted to be famous. That was the whole plan. Sing a few songs, maybe land a talk show spot, and live like a pop star. What actually happened? She ended up trading the stage for something with a whole lot more blood and fewer encores. This is the story of Mona Fandey, a failed pop star turned spiritual fixer for Malaysia's political elite. Her clients were powerful, her promises were bold, and one of them didn't live to see the receipt. This case is about a crime, obviously, but it's also about ambition, ego, black magic, and a woman who smiled through a murder trial like it was her album launch. Before we dive in, if you like your true crime brief and bingeable, you're in the right place. Hit follow now for at least 2 new episodes every week. This is 10-Minute Murder. Let's get into it. Just a quick heads up, I'm probably going to mispronounce some of the names and places in this episode. Not on purpose. I promise I looked them up. I tried, and I probably still got a few wrong. Just know that it's not disrespect. It's me doing the best I can with a mouth that occasionally forgets how language works. All right, here we go. If fame were a currency, Nur Manza binti Ismail was ready to go bankrupt chasing it. Born into a modest Malaysian family, she came out of the gate with 2 things, ambition and flair. As a kid, she dabbled in singing and water ballet because apparently walking wasn't dramatic enough. She wanted the spotlight early, and she wasn't subtle about it. By 1987, she rebranded herself with the kind of confidence usually reserved for people who wear sunglasses at night. She picked the stage name, Mona Fandey, and dropped her debut album, Diana, like she was already Malaysia's next big pop icon. Her husband, Muhammad Nur Afandi Abdul Rahman, was all in, fully supportive, possibly delusional. He drained their savings to get Mona airtime on national TV, hoping that the exposure would kickstart her music career. It didn't. She had the style, the hair, and the determination. What she didn't have was sales. Whatever brief flicker of flame she caught fizzled out fast. Malaysia blinked and moved on. But Mona didn't. With her pop star dreams officially stalled, she pivoted into something less glamorous and way more profitable. She and Mohammed started calling themselves bomohs. That's the Malaysian version of a shaman or spiritual healer. Think ritual magic, folk medicine, and occasional negotiating with the spirit realm. Need a boost in your career? Need someone else's to implode? Call a bomoh. And it turned out Mona was much better at conjuring power than performing on stage. Malaysian culture has long held a deep belief in magic, and Mona's services were in high demand. Politicians, celebrities, even the rich and restless, all started showing up at her door. Some wanted healing. Others wanted favors from the beyond. Some just wanted a shortcut to power. She didn't end up a pop star, but she got everything that came along with being one, just through a much darker door. Mona Fandey's client list looked like a Forbes gala, with a side of superstition. Wealthy business people came to her hoping she could turn their fortunes from big to obscene. The sick arrived desperate for healing when hospitals gave up. And politicians, they wanted the kind of help that you won't find on a campaign manual. They came looking for power, and sometimes to erase a rival or two along the way. It paid off big time. Mona had mansions across Malaysia, a fleet of expensive cars, closets full of designer clothes, and a taste for 5-star hotel living. She might not have cracked the pop charts, but she was living like she had. She built a life that looked exactly like the fame she'd always wanted. Then came 1993. A local politician named Mazlan Idris showed up. He had ambition, connections, and enough belief in bomoh magic to try and cheat the political ladder. He heard Mona was the real deal, and he wanted in. At their meeting, Mona and Mohammed offered Mazlan something with serious alleged power, a talisman they claimed had once belonged to the first president of Indonesia. They'd sold things like this before to their other clients, so this wasn't new for them. But this talisman came with a premium price tag. 2.5 million ringgits. Maslan didn't blink. He was a firm believer in the idea that to make money, you have to spend it. He offered 500,000 ringgits, with 300,000 up front. The rest, he said, would come in the form of property. So the next day, Maslan crisscrossed Kuala Lumpur, stopping at banks and pulling out wads of cash like he was planning to fund a heist. By that evening, he handed over the money, 300,000 ringgits in cash, which at the time was about 120,000 US dollars. And then, Maslan vanished. No goodbye, no press conference, just gone. The day after Maslan Idris vanished, Mona was suddenly everywhere. She was seen around town spending like she just hit the spiritual jackpot. She bought luxury clothes, a brand new car, a phone, a TV, and an entire set of furniture, right down to custom kitchen cabinets. Then, because nothing says subtle like cosmetic surgery, she checked herself into a hospital for a facelift and a nose job. But the shopping spree did not last long. Their assistant, Jarami Hassan, was picked up on unrelated drug charges. During questioning, he dropped a confession that spun the whole case sideways. He told investigators to check out one of Mona and Mohammed's many properties. There, buried beneath a pit covered in cement, they found what was left of Maslan Idris. His body had been dismembered into 18 pieces. Parts of his skin had been removed. Several organs were missing, including his testicles. He had died from a sharp blow to the neck. Soon after, Mona, Mohammed, and Jarami were all arrested for Maslan's murder. When investigators searched the rest of Mona and Mohammed's properties, they made more disturbing discoveries. A dead family, another woman, several jars filled with preserved human organs. None of it could be conclusively tied to Mona or Mohammed, but the theory was clear. These weren't just murders. They may have been ritual sacrifices, possibly offered up in exchange for power or protection. But proving that in court was another story. So authorities focused on the one case they could prove, Maslan. At trial, Jarami testified against the couple. He said Mona and Mohammed had orchestrated the entire thing. According to him, Maslan showed up with the money, expecting a ceremony that would bring him wealth beyond imagination. Mona told Maslan to lie down on the floor. She placed an orchid on his forehead and told him to close his eyes. At some point, a voice would ask how much money he wanted. If the magic worked, the cash would appear. Maslan believed her. He closed his eyes and waited. What he didn't know was that behind him, Jarami stood with an axe. He struck 3 times, severing Maslan's head. Mona and Mohammed then told Jarami to dismember the body while they went off to wash the blood off in a shower. Mohammed's version of events was, let's say, different. First, he claimed Maslan owed him over 2 million ringgits for a magical cane. Not a joke, a literal cane. Then he changed direction. Now it was all Jarami. According to Mohammed, he and Mona were just doing the ceremony like normal when Jarami suddenly showed up and attacked Maslan out of nowhere. They were shocked. They were scared. So they ran. Too traumatized to call the police. Too confused to tell anyone what happened. But somehow, not too traumatized to spend the victim's money on luxury goods the very next day. The serial numbers on the banknotes traced directly back to the cash Maslan had withdrawn, and the courtroom started to look a lot less like a mystery and a lot more like a closing argument. Mohammed stuck to his story. According to him, he and Mona had no intention of hurting Maslan. The plan, he said, was to perform the ceremony as promised, but then Jarami snapped, as I said. Mona never took the stand. She never tried to explain herself, but she did make sure people were watching. The murder of a high-profile politician had finally made her famous, and she was soaking it up like stage lights. She dressed to be noticed. She smiled like she was posing for an album cover. And during one court appearance, she turned to reporters and said, "Looks like I have many fans." It was bizarre. She wasn't just on trial for murder, she was performing. Through the whole process, Mona stayed silent on the details. She denied the charges but didn't argue the evidence against her. Her only complaint was that prison guards had pressed too hard on her facelift stitches to force a confession. That was it. Anything else, she reserved for the cameras, smiling, waving, posing like she was on a red carpet, not sitting in the defendant's chair at a capital murder trial. When the guilty verdict came down, Mona didn't flinch. Even as the judge handed her a death sentence, she kept smiling. Outside the courtroom, she thanked Malaysians. She then blew kisses to the crowd while she, Mohammed, and Jeremy were escorted to death row. They appealed the decision, but it didn't work. On the morning of November 2nd, 2001, all three were brought to the gallows. Black hoods, tied legs, no last-minute theatrics, just a final smile from Mona and the words, "I will never die." Their bodies were left hanging for an hour, as required, before being taken down and buried. Thanks for listening to 10-Minute Murder. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. There's a new story every week, a couple of new stories every week, as a matter of fact, and they're all just as brief and bingeable and unsettling as this one. You can also follow along on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, and everything else, including full episode list and show info, you can find at 10minutemurder.com. And this podcast exists because you keep listening, you keep sharing, and generally being the kind of people who can handle true crime without needing dramatic music and ominous thunder in the background. I don't have all those dramatics in me, so thank you for that. In the meantime, stay out of trouble, be decent to people, and it wouldn't hurt you to share the podcast with people that you know. I appreciate it. Talk to you next time. XOXO. Gossip Girl.